So welcome again to our morning of practice together. And just curious if anyone is here for the first time. Anyone? Okay. Oh, welcome. And you're Greg? Greg.
Friends of Christine.
Welcome. Thanks for coming. Really glad you're both here. And just really want to invite you to feel supported during our time together. Greg, it's great you're standing up and stretching. If anyone needs to do anything like that, to stretch, to look around the room, to yawn, please do. And I just want to also just take a moment to notice what it took to be here, all the efforts and the intentions and the planning, just to show up for a practice meeting like this. It's a real effort, and I appreciate it. And then doing this thing that we're doing together, this slowing down and feeling into a practice community, and even as we're connecting, sort of also intentionally disconnecting a little bit from our day-to-day lives, like, okay, setting down the social media, setting down the news for a little while, setting down maybe some of the busyness, and relaxing into some practice together. And doing something that really goes against the streams of this dominant culture and the ways that it is seeking to condition us. Okay, world of delusion and aversion and greed. You want me numbed out. You want me weighed down with rage. You want me immobilized by despair. You want to mislead me to pursue what cannot really give me true happiness and pleasure. And you want me to ignore my spiritual health and well-being. And by showing up, we're saying no. The truth that we are here shows that that conditioning does not control us. It's a courageous thing to do, to show up in this way and to seek to break those bonds and say no to them. And it's a kind of care that's so much deeper, than a spa treatment or, a good meal or something like that. There's a kind of self-care here that has an element of defiance and hope in it. So with everything that's happening in the world and in this country right now, I make a conscious choice to meet it from here, from the heart. And I'm preparing to teach a retreat in Washington State next week, and so I'm kind of getting ready for that and thinking about, this retreating. How do you retreat in a world that is so chaotic? And how do you move into peaceful practice when your heart may be anything but peaceful right now? How do you find safety in the practice? And when we go on retreat, it isn't resistance to what's here in our lives and in the world to try and make it disappear in some way or to cover it over with like a frosting of peace, but to actually welcome and practice what's here because it's here, to know it and to practice relating to our experience without opposition and with compassion and care. So we hear words like that a lot. But what does that mean, relating to our experience with compassion and care? How do we actually practice that? And I mean really practice that. And how does that way of relating support the growth of our own natural wisdom, the movement of the heart to freedom, the heart of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva like Kuan Yin, who should be on the screen behind me. Hearing the cries of the world, including our own cries, with deep listening and presence. And I know from facilitating groups like this and teaching retreats over many years that we often come because we are in pain and need space to heal. Because if everything's going according to plan, according to the dominant culture plan, according to what we see on social media and in magazines, it's like we don't know that we need this. It's often when we are in pain, when we are sensitized, that we understand, yeah, I need a space to heal from harm, from grief. That was one of the things that really I found made me sign up for my very first retreat. My mother passed on, and within 3 days, I think, of that, I signed up for my first residential retreat. It almost happened without thinking. I was on a mailing list, so I saw it come through, and it was like, yep, that. And I didn't really know anything about the retreat experience or what it meant to go on a silent retreat. But something in me that wasn't my usual mind of, if I do this, then that will happen, or should I, shouldn't I, what are the pros and cons? Something beyond that conditioning just made the choice for me. Okay, doing it. And I also knew that the practices that I was learning in the weekly Dharma group that I attended, the remembering and reclaiming of awareness like we do, remembering self-kindness, self-compassion, and the way that the teachings I was hearing helped me reframe my view of life, reframe it in accord with actual reality, what's actually happening with nature, with what is happening rather than my wishes, I sensed that, okay, there's something here that could support me. And so going into that retreat, of course, I wanted to drop right into that lovely, blissful, meditative space that I imagined. But what I remember most about that retreat was the tenderness and care that I was able to offer myself because of the slowing down, because of the gift of space and relative silence, and the time to hold what needed to be held. And I really don't remember very much, if anything, about the Dharma talks, or the specific meditations, or where I slept, or anything like that. What I remember most is being quiet with other people, and the wild carrot flower that took the shape of a heart, that I saw on one of my walks. It felt like a message from my mother. And as I was writing this talk, I came across some words by the Thai forest monk Ajahn Chah. I've never run across this before. And he said, if you have not cried deeply a number of times, your meditation has not really begun. If you have not cried deeply a number of times, your meditation has not really begun. So we are practicing in the presence of difficult emotions. This is what it is to be human, and there's nothing outside of our practice. And the anxieties and fears and despair that we might be experiencing right now because of reactionary policies and politics, the cruelty that we see and maybe experience, the lack of ethical integrity, the rampant and pointless greed, these are on top of the fears that we already have, the just being human fears for ourselves, for our loved ones, and our communities. And so the Buddha used this word dukkha to describe, the collection of suffering. And he said, birth is dukkha, aging, sickness is dukkha, death is dukkha, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Association with the disliked is dukkha. Separation from the liked is dukkha. Not getting what one wants is dukkha. And then all the stresses that we carry around, stresses around health, employment, finances, relationships, overwhelm. And this is experienced by all human beings. And there are ways of holding it in ourselves that lead to less pain in our experience. And the heart of the spiritual path, I think, is revealed in questions. And some of those questions, like, how can I live justly? How can I live with less pain? How can I cause less pain? And I ask those questions, and I want to be really clear that I don't have that figured out. I don't know how to not experience dukkha and pain. I don't know how to make my intense emotions go away or to fix them. But little by little, I'm learning more about how I can hold them, and that I can actually care for myself in the process, that I can respond in a way that's appropriate to what's here, and that we all can. It's very human to feel fear and anxiety, all of the emotions, even when we practice, and perhaps especially when we practice, because we're staying still, staying present, opening to the capacity of the mind that is aware, being sensitive enough to shed those tears. And so I want to welcome all those feelings, difficult as that may be sometimes, because they're here. That's how it is now. And the feelings are coming from an authentic place, a place of sensitivity, of caring, of wanting to protect, of wanting to answer those questions at the heart. And so for me, after decades of practice, the feelings have not gone away, but what has slowly changed is how I hold them and how I hold myself as I hold them. So let's spend a little more time with this. How can we hold what is difficult? I mean, we're all doing it somehow or another. And how are we doing it? And how can we hold ourselves? And how can the Dharma support us? And what we're experiencing now, I just also want to name collectively and individually, may be triggering old wounds and traumas that we carry. Triggering feelings of chaos that we might have experienced in the past or in our childhood that have never really been healed. I'm flashing back a lot on the feelings I had coming out as a gay man at the beginning of the AIDS crisis. And politicians were literally calling for the quarantine of gay men. And I can remember sitting in our little living room, this little haven of safety, just feeling that fear of the future, not knowing what was to come, what was outside, and feeling the hatred and the ignorance. And I feel that again, for myself and for immigrants and people of color and women and trans and queer people and the unhoused. And then to shift gears for a moment, there is a beautiful mudra or hand gesture that the Buddha is often depicted making. It's called the Abhaya mudra. Abhaya meaning free from fear, and mudra meaning gesture or sign. So sign of fearlessness. And often the Buddha images that you'll see, the standing ones particularly, he's holding his hand like this. And it's not flat like stop, but it's cupped slightly, it's relaxed. And it's interesting, to feel for yourself what it feels like to take this mudra. You don't have to do it now. You can do it at home later when no one's watching. But it's just interesting to see what you feel. Like I feel this soft, balanced presence. And it's a hand that's saying, I'm awake, I'm aware, I'm present to what's here. And you often see this gesture when the Buddha is calming his disciples, his followers, or wild animals. And there's a teaching in this mudra, I think, for how we can hold our fear or really any difficult emotion. So not pushing away, not grasping tight, but just soft, present, awake, aware. And there are so many places in the suttas, which are the records of the Buddha's life and teachings, his own practice and the practice of his students, where we receive this teaching on relating to difficult emotions, like this. So there's one called the Fear and Dread Sutta. And the Buddha describes meeting the fear he felt meditating in the forest, where there were snakes and tigers and bandits. And he speaks of meeting it intentionally and not shifting his position externally or internally, remaining rooted and knowing the changing nature of fear and inhabiting his own refuges of his ethical integrity, his renunciation of the delusions and ways of the world, and his practice. And he literally does not let the fear move him, shift him. He knows the emotion, and he knows his own Buddha nature, his own wisdom and capacity to be with dukkha. And then often the difficult emotions are personified by Mara, who's the sort of tempter, trickster figure of the suttas. And Mara tries again and again to unsettle the Buddha. And Mara can transform himself into all kinds of fearful things, armies and demons and monsters and charging elephants and earthquakes and huge serpents, whatever he can think of. And then the internal monsters as well, self-doubt, feelings of unworthiness, of being lazy. I thought that was really interesting to read how many times the Buddha was accused by Mara of being lazy, And Mara also tried to unsettle the Buddha's students in the same ways. And again, there's a response from the Buddha, and particularly the nuns who Mara often was trying to unsettle. And they say, "I see you, Mara." And then when Mara is seen, he generally makes his exit. So I'll just read one of the suttas. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Rajagaha on the Vulture's Peak mountain. Now at that time, the Buddha was meditating in the open during the dark of night, while a gentle rain drizzled down. Then Mara the wicked, wanting to make the Buddha feel fear, terror, and goosebumps, approached him and crushed some large boulders close by him. And then the Buddha, knowing that this was Mara the wicked, addressed him in verse, "Even if you shake this entire Vulture's Peak, the rightly released, the awakened, are unshaken." Then Mara, thinking, "The Buddha knows me," vanished right there. So these difficult emotions often come up and are seen and they depart in the suttas. Yet, throughout the Buddha's life, on the night of his enlightenment, during his long teaching career, and on the night of his passing as he lay dying, Mara returned. Mara keeps coming back. And maybe that aligns with your own experience. It isn't so much that we get rid of Mara, that we do away with these difficult emotions and thoughts, but that they arise and pass away and arise again. So it's an ongoing relationship we have with Mara, or our fears, or our pain, or our hurt feelings, or our grief for the world, or our rage or despair. This is the work of a lifetime, or maybe many lifetimes. Sometimes it says in the suttas that Mara is defeated. Yet the word for defeated that's used is nihato, which has also a sense of putting to rest. And that feels like a result of that bearing witness, of holding one's seat, of staying with ourselves in the midst of the storm. And this putting to rest has the sense of caring for the pain, for the suffering, letting it rest now because it's been seen. And the Dalai Lama speaks to this in his book with Howard Cutler called The Art of Happiness, which some of you might have read. And at one time he gave an elder monk some advice that he felt had led to that monk's death. And so he felt, of course, deep regret about that. And so he was asked by Cutler, his writing partner, how did you deal with that feeling of regret? How did you eventually get rid of it? And the Dalai Lama silently considered for quite a while before replying, I didn't get rid of it. It's still there. He stopped again, Cutler writes, before adding, but even though that feeling of regret is still there, it isn't associated with a feeling of heaviness or a quality of pulling me back. It wouldn't be helpful to anyone if I let that feeling of regret weigh me down, be simply a source of discouragement and depression with no purpose, or interfere with going on with my life to the best of my ability. And the interviewer was moved by this response, and he wrote this: "At that moment, in a very visceral way, I was struck once again by the very real possibility of a human being's fully facing life's tragedies and responding emotionally, even with deep regret, but without indulging in excessive guilt or self-contempt. The possibility of a human being's wholly accepting themselves, complete with limitations, foibles, and lapses of judgment. The possibility of recognizing a bad situation for what it is and responding emotionally, but without over-responding. I didn't get rid of it. It's still there. The relationship to the pain has been transformed." Okay, so what is this relationship? How can we relate like the Buddha, the nuns, the Dalai Lama? How to stay still in the storm, how to not be pushed off of our seat. This is what we get to explore. So, spending a few more minutes with this. First, when we do any sort of meditation, awareness is our foundation. Awareness is the ground. Awareness is the sky. And we often take that capacity to be aware for granted. We don't always notice the background that's always present. We see the objects in the foreground. We see the things that are moving and spinning and making noise and flashing lights. And yet, in the infinity of space, objects take up very little space. There's much more space than there is objects. So when we practice like this, when we remember awareness, we're noticing the background, we're noticing that still part. So Ruth Dennison, who is a teacher of my teacher, says we have two minds always running, the conditioned and the one that is intuitive and aware. We have two minds always running, the conditioned and the one that is intuitive and aware. It's a really interesting inquiry. Check it out. And it's that intuitive and aware mind that is the ground. And the Buddha pointed out that all of our experience takes place in this body, mind, heart system. And there's a teaching from secular mindfulness, MBSR, that's helpful for me, the circle of awareness. And around the circle at the cardinal points are body sensations, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And these aspects of experience are in relationship with each other. And they are our experience. That is what we experience: thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and sensations. And when I practice with this, I place a dot at the center of the circle. And the dot, for me, represents awareness, that second mind that Ruth identifies. And the dot is actually infinite. I'd never stop drawing if I was trying to draw it. It stands for the whole background, the ground that holds everything, the circle of awareness, our entire experience, stretching in all directions and all dimensions. And it's from that perspective that I can know the contents of my experience and even know that awareness itself. So Thich Nhat Hanh said, I can know fear is in me and also mindfulness is in me, or grief, or shame, or boredom, or whatever it might be, and mindfulness, and awareness. We don't have to fear the fear, or be angry with the anger, or check out from the numbness, because that is not all that we have to meet this moment. So we're practicing with what's already here. We always are. The dukkha is here for sure. Mara is here. And also our own Buddha nature, the capacity to know and hold with wisdom. So I wanted to bring in another Buddhist nun, a present-day Buddhist nun, Tenzin Palmo, and she was interviewed and put it this way. The thing is that we're always given this message that, our potential is so limited, which is so sad because actually our potential is infinite. One of the main antidotes to real depression, lack of self-esteem, and loneliness and so forth is the recognition that ultimately we really do have Buddha nature, and that all these other problems, our anger and jealousy and ambitions, are merely habitual patterns which we have learned, but which are not inherent to who we really are. That the nature of the mind is completely incredible, and we are not lowly sinners. We are not worthless beings. We are something jewel-like and beautiful. And the path is really to help us to overcome just our endless ego-grasping mind, to open up to something so much more spacious and genuinely meaningful, if only we knew where to look. We identify with all the wrong things, she says. Of course, this is the whole point of Buddhism, is that we are identifying with our very relative, conventional mind stream, and we're not recognizing the primordial awareness behind it all. So these two minds always running, conditioned and the one that's intuitive and aware. So the first step is remembering our capacity to hold more than the flashing lights and the honking horns, to look deeper, to remember this beautiful, subtle, and sure capacity to be aware, which is with us throughout our lives. It's always there, like the breath is. And it's a refuge. And this is why we practice all these different pathways to that knowing, meditation of breathing, of walking, of movement, of eating. And something so simple seeming as just coming back to or waking up to this moment like we do in the quiet practice, even if this moment is filled with crap, is a powerful and wholesome movement toward healing. The moment that we are aware of, we aren't completely caught up in. And from there, we can see what happens. So the first step in holding what's here is establishing some mindfulness, whatever you can. And sometimes the intention is enough to shift something. And in that establishing of mindfulness that we've created, or better said, that we've remembered, our capacity to be aware of this moment, and then knowing what's actually here, in the body and the heart right now. What is happening right here, right now? And there may be a storyline, but what's actually happening right now on the level of sensation and experience? What do I feel? Where do I feel it? Is it changing? Is it familiar? What is this? So as soon as we do that, we've invited mindfulness and investigation into the field. And so we have now two really strong healing energies in addition to whatever is difficult. And mindfulness and investigation are actually the first two places on the 7 factors of awakening. They're the foundation. That's where we start. And so something has changed. Whatever the gripped or intense feeling might be present, there's this addition of caring, of paying attention. Not grasping, not pushing away. And it's that mind that says, I see you, Mara. And the seeing loosens the grip gradually. And we can know, Mara, I know you will come back again, and you'll come back again. And I'm willing to keep showing up for you with compassion and awareness. And I want to say, particularly right now, there may be times when it's how to do this, how to practice when my mind and heart are in turmoil, and returning to the breath just feels like it doesn't apply right now. What can I do in that case? And so often, we may need to start with self-compassion, some kindness toward this being right here, right now, who's having this experience. And we may need to take care of ourselves in order to take that first step of creating space, in order to establish mindfulness and investigation. And there's a really helpful formula that I use, and it came from Kristen Neff, who's one of the founders of mindful self-compassion teachings, along with Christopher Germer, that have their root in the Dharma. And it's really a way of seeing dukkha, of identifying it and turning toward our experience with care. And the first part is, this is a moment of suffering. So recognizing in this moment there is suffering, there is pain, there is dukkha that is being experienced in my experience. So not pushing past it, but noticing that the pain is here, the impact of what we're actually feeling. So this is a moment of suffering. That's step one. Step two is, suffering is a part of life. And this is so simple, but it points us to something that's so important. The universality of experience, that we are not alone in feeling pain. That there is nothing wrong with us that we feel pain. So this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself. That intention of care. And then specifically, may I give myself the compassion that I need. What might that look like in this moment? And in the moment, you might find, yeah, I think it looks like sitting with it and creating some space. Or it might look like going for a walk, or reading a Dharma book, or watching the sky. But whatever we choose, it's motivated by true kindness to ourselves in that moment. Not a bypass, not a distraction, but a wise means to approach what's here. And that can be a beautiful inquiry for us. What is that path in right now? So sort of seeking the balance between comfort and growth. And we can see what's truly compassionate. The walk, the Dharma talk, versus the behaviors that we use to numb and postpone. So caring for ourselves is not numbing. And those are two different things, so noticing that. And then, yes, if I show myself that compassion, then maybe there's enough strength in this moment to actually sit with what's here, with mindfulness and investigation. So I'm curious to know your thoughts, but I want to close with a poem and then a moment of silence. And I brought two poems, and I wasn't sure which one I want to read. This is the one that is more, I'll read it slowly. It's one that probably bears multiple readings, and it's by Ada Limon, who is our National Poet Laureate. And it's called The Hurting Kind. No, it's from her book, The Hurting Kind, and the poem is called Sanctuary. Suppose it's easy to slip into another's green skin, bury yourself in leaves and wait for a breaking open, a breaking out. I have before been tricked into believing I could be both an I and the world. The great I of the world is both gaze and gloss, to be swallowed by being seen, a dream, to be made whole by being not a witness, but witnessed. Okay, let's take just a couple minutes to sit with our thoughts and feelings and let the words go where they might. So thank you for your kind attention, and would love to hear your thoughts. So I think it's time to share the merit, and just once again want to invite anyone who would like to volunteer to either sign up in the back of the room or go to volunteers@desertinsight.org and sign up there. And I'm going to share the screen so we can share the merit together. And hang on just one second. And I want to thank you so much for your support of this community and the teachers and the organization. It's a privilege and an honor to be part of this community. So I'm going to share this, and then let's offer this together. Going forth into this world, so in need of light, may I bring all the kindness and wisdom I embody to each being and each situation that I meet. May the power of my practice today strengthen my resolve to be an agent of peace and justice in this world. Going forth together into this world so in need of light, may we together bring all the kindness and wisdom we embody to each being and each situation that we meet. May the power of our practice today strengthen our resolve to be agents of peace and justice in this world. We dedicate our practice for the liberation of all beings, the great, the small, the wise, the ignorant, the powerful, and the powerless. May all beings be liberated from sorrow and loss, hatred and injustice, scarcity and want, and every form of suffering. May our practice today be a prayer for peace, and may it benefit all beings without exception. So, thank you, friends, and see you soon, I hope.